Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV. In this age of owning nothing, it might surprise you to learn that physical media is actually enduring among consumers, and we have proof of it thanks to a comprehensive survey recently done by Consumer Reports. And in today's video, we're going to look at the results of that survey and talk to the guy that made it happen. Let's get to it. Now, before we dive into this topic, I do want to let you know that today's video is being brought to you by all of you. That includes everyone who subscribes to this channel and watches on a regular basis, but also those of you who contribute to the channel through my donor box page at Lon.TV/support or through my Patreon, the YouTube membership program, and Float Plane. We also have some great merch that many of you have picked up, including this cool coffee mug, and I'm always on the lookout for other merch ideas, so let me know down in the comments section. And I want to thank you all for your continued support of this channel because this does help keep the lights on around here. And without further ado, let's get into this week's topic. Now, this survey was conducted by the nonprofit Consumer Reports organization. Consumer Reports, of course, does a lot of product testing, and of course, those results are published in their magazine. But they also do a lot of advocacy on the behalf of consumers in Washington and elsewhere. So this survey that they do helps guide their direction, and they weight it in such a way that it reflects the American population, and it's got a very large sample size. So this most recent survey had 2,022 interviews, and they weight the respondents based on demographics so that the survey reflects the American population here. There's a margin of error of 2.72%, with a 95% confidence level that the numbers we're going to see here are accurate and reflective of what consumers are doing, in this case, with legacy media. By the way, this report had some other things on it as well, so you may want to go back and check the link that you see on screen here. They also surveyed people on their cybersecurity habits too. It's all interesting stuff. But let's start off here with audio media. And no surprise, people are still listening to CDs. 45% of Americans say they do. And what's funny about this number is that if you look at vinyl records compared to that, it's kind of surprising that vinyl isn't stronger given the fact that vinyl records have been outselling CDs on a regular basis. But remember, this survey is about what people are using, not what they are currently buying. So a lot of older folks like myself have a collection of CDs of our favorite music, and we're probably just replaying the stuff that we bought years ago. Also of note, 20% of Americans report that they're still using a dedicated music player like an iPod or a Zune. So those are things that are still out there and still being used on a regular basis. Cassette tapes, which have been making a comeback, have come in here at 15%. There's actually companies now selling refurbished Walkmans, so you can get yourself right back to the 80s there if you want. And there's some other types of media here still being consumed, including 8-track tapes with 5%, reel-to-reel tapes at 4%. And remember, our margin of error here was like 2.7%. So there are still a good number of Americans still using some very old legacy audio formats. Let's move over now to video. And of course, DVDs and Blu-rays are being consumed by about half of the American population. And that's no surprise. Certainly used DVDs are pretty cheap right now. Blu-rays have better quality than streaming. So we're seeing some folks still hanging on to those. And of course, you can still buy DVDs and Blu-rays right now if you want, although many retailers are rolling back the sales of them. Also of note, VHS tapes are still being consumed by 15% of Americans. And there's been a bit of a resurgence lately of VHS, mostly as a collector's item. And I found this article in the New York Post where you can see what some people are doing in their basements to turn them into old VHS movie stores, a little theme for their collections there. Another surprising number here is that 3% of Americans, again, just over the margin of error, report that they're still watching laser discs. And of course, I was a big laser disc guy back in the 90s, and some people still like those laser discs, and those are definitely great collectibles as well. Now, as far as consumer-generated media is concerned, I was very surprised to see here that only 9% of Americans report that they use a dedicated video camera or camcorder. It wasn't all that long ago when you could buy relatively affordable camcorders from most of the major manufacturers like Canon and Sony and others. Now there are very few cameras being marketed towards general consumers because most of us have switched to smartphones, which of course do pretty good video these days. and the same is definitely true of point-and-shoot cameras. Also of note, only 4% of Americans report using TiVo or other digital video recorders, so I am definitely in the minority on that one. And film slide projectors have the same number here, only 4% of Americans still using those. But I would venture to say there are many more Americans with lots of slide carousels in a closet somewhere just waiting to be rediscovered and reconsumed. But of course, you can get those digitally scanned by a service or a device or something. Here's another good one. Classic video game systems, 14%. I was expecting this number actually to be a little higher, but I think this is one of those areas where if you're really into something, you can get yourself connected to a community where things might seem bigger than they really are. But still, there's plenty of an economy for classic video games out there to support conventions and lots of retail stores owned by small business owners. So clearly, classic video games on the original systems are still quite popular. I would bet you that if we look back at this number in a couple of years, it might grow a little bit. I know in my own classic game consumption, I've gone back to using an old tube television just because that's how it's supposed to be. And I bet you a lot of other folks might find themselves getting to that point as well. Now, they also asked about legacy home office equipment, and about a quarter of Americans are still using a landline telephone, although I would venture to say that many of those landlines are actually voice over IP landlines. In my area, Frontier, the phone company, when they come in to give you fiber optic service for internet, they pull out your copper phone lines and move your phone over to their voice over IP product that works on the fiber. Fax machines, 11%, Rolodex, 5%, and floppy disks are still hanging in at 4%. One thing this survey did not have were crosstabs where we could see what age groups are using this technology more than others. That would have been really interesting to see. But now what I want to do is cut to an interview I did with the reporter responsible for getting this survey out there. Let's have a look. Now, joining me is Jim Wilcox, the journalist who wrote the article about the survey. Jim has been a journalist in the tech space for over 30 years, 18 of them at Consumer Reports. Which is great to see some stability in the media world here, at least for Consumer Reports as a nonprofit, and we'll certainly talk about that before we close out. So Jim, first of all, how often does this type of survey go out from the Consumer Reports organization? It looks like I had a pretty big sample size too.
So we do a survey every month. It's called an AES survey. It's funny. I was just having this conversation with my wife about my fondness for, older gear and stuff. And so I was able to submit some questions to that survey. It's a survey of a little over 2,000 people. It's nationally representative. So it means that it's basically reflecting the demographics of the country. So 30% is probably 60 and over, but all the other age ranges are in the 20 to 25%. So it does reflect, our country as a whole demographically.
Interesting. So you actually were the one that snuck those questions in about legacy hardware.
Yeah, so every month, we do this survey and you get a chance to submit some questions. And if they decide that it's an interesting enough topic, you get your questions in there. So I did that. I wasn't sure what the reception would be because it was a sort of a personal thing for me. A lot of times what we're asking is really more sort of concrete things. But I was like, I wonder how many people are out there like me who just have a fondness for older gear, who may collect stuff. And they thought it would be an interesting topic. And it seems like so far it's been received pretty well.
Yeah, the story definitely got some legs, which I certainly got into all of my circles of old stuff that I have around me here. What surprised you about this survey? Because there were a few things in your article that seemed to stand out to you.
Yeah, I think one of the things, just covering the industry for this long, my experience has been that people always project the demise of formats. So a new format comes out, they think it's going to immediately kill an older one. And in fact, it doesn't always do that, or it just takes longer. So I think that the surprises to me were that, people still have these collector groups around certain types of media. The fact that, cassettes have been up 400% over the last couple of years.
Right.
And there are these small communities that, sort of get founded around interesting and older technology. And there's probably a ton of reasons for that. But the fact that, half the people still are watching DVDs and Blu-ray players, that was a little higher given the prevalence of streaming services. 40%, I think, were still using CDs. And so I guess I just felt happy that there were more people out there like me than I probably thought when I started.
And you're an audiophile, and in the article, it looked as though there was some surprise around the fact that although vinyl is now outselling CDs, it's not reflected in the usage.
Yeah, it's hard to tell with vinyl. Sometimes things become fads, and when they become fads, one of the things that was interesting when I was doing a story a couple of years ago was if you talk about the number of people who are buying vinyl, it's much higher than the people who are actually listening to vinyl. So,
Yeah,
like, people just wanted to have a turntable and vinyl in their apartment for aesthetic reasons. People come over, it's like, oh, he's into vinyl.
right.
Um, so, we didn't capture that kind of use stuff as part of the survey. But my experience a lot of times is that once things move from the real enthusiasts to it becoming a fad, a lot of times people own these things but don't use them to the degree you would think they would. But the interesting thing is that I think that during COVID, a lot of people just really started to rethink their communications. And once you were isolated from people and everything became virtual, I think a lot of people started to feel that that personal connection was something that they were starting to lose and desire for it. And when you get involved in either collecting, with these older gear, there are communities that arise around them, and that's a sense of belonging to a community. And a lot of times, and I think that that's very appealing because so much of the world now is, it's AI, it's automation, it's virtual, and I think that for a lot of people, they're looking for that tangible connection to other human beings.
So from this survey, you put it out there. Obviously, there's a pretty large expense on Consumer Reports to survey 2,000 people and get that demographic sample to where it needs to be reflective. Does this guide perhaps what products Consumer Reports looks at? Does this guide your coverage? What did you glean from putting these questions in and getting the results back?
Yeah, this was a little bit different because it wasn't about a specific product. So there are times that we'll use surveys to help inform us about what consumers are looking for. Are there products that, we're not covering that we should be? We cover a ton of products. We have 50 labs that's always, doing full testing on products. We don't take advertising in the magazine or online. We don't, we buy everything that we test. So nothing that we don't take freebies from companies. So we're pretty independent. But this was sort of a one-off. You don't see a lot of these kinds of questions in the surveys that we do. So it's probably just not really, I would say, consistent with what we use a lot of the surveys for. But it did make me think about whether or not there are some products that we might want to cover in a different way. Maybe not bring them into the lab and rate them, but just talk about in articles about the resurgence of certain technologies, people holding on to physical media, and explaining maybe why there are advantages to physical media. And there's a lot of articles right now about a return to physical media. With streaming, I think a lot of people get frustrated. As the media companies started to create their own content, they used to license it. Now they keep it all for their own services. So you may have to subscribe to 8 or 9 services to get everything you want. You never know when content's going to disappear from a service.
Right.
And when you have a CD or a DVD and you own it, you'll have that for the life of that product. It's not like, oh, they signed a new licensing deal. I no longer have access to this thing that I had access to. So I think there's some compelling reasons. And I think there's probably, some reasons for us to investigate that a little bit further. I grew up in an area where you own things. And so the concept that you actually don't own anything anymore is foreign to someone like me. Now, there's generations growing up and they get used to it. But, you've seen more and more companies move away from being able to buy a product, even software, and now
Right.
it's you'll pay so much a month for this thing for the rest of your life. It's a fundamental change, and I think it is a big consumer issue. We have a whole advocacy division in Washington, D.C. So, there's the product review part of our company, but there's also the advocacy arm that, lobbies for, safer cars, better car seats, things like that. And those are the kinds of issues that we'll occasionally take up. We did a big project on broadband affordability and accessibility. So, we do get involved in those kinds of conversations. Increasingly, I think it's been a little frustrating dealing with Washington in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly, we have the ability to raise the flag with consumers that this is an issue that you should care about and perhaps do something for.
And that's what I think one of the things people don't realize about Consumer Reports is that a lot of times we see this and we think it's a magazine that reviews products. But as you mentioned, it's nonprofit. They purchase everything that they review. So there's tremendous cost involved in providing this service, but there's advocacy as well there. So if I'm a general consumer and I want to help the effort, it's more than a subscription, I guess. When you subscribe, you become a member. Is that how this works?
Yeah, and we're very big on the membership component of it, because then it's a two-way conversation. It's not just like, oh, we send you this stuff or you look at something either online or in the magazine. We run campaigns all the time around different kinds of things. We're doing a lot of investigative things. We discovered arsenic in rice, for example. There's some unsafe child products. Car seats has been a big thing. And so, the fact that these are members means that we have a two-way communication with them. And so we're constantly reaching out. We have different initiatives that consumers can take part in. Could be everything from, a petition to some kind of activity. We have mobilization people who work in local communities for issues that are affecting them, like broadband. And so it really is a two-way, conversation with consumers, so that we can find out, what are the concerns that they have, and we can show them ways that they can help contribute to solving whatever problems they have.
Great. Well, head over to consumerreports.org and you can get signed up and become a member, get the magazine. What's great, too, is you get access to the database. So I was looking for a dishwasher recently, and it was really helpful just to have that database there waiting for me. So you don't even have to go and try to find the magazine anymore. It's all up there and accessible. And I think the work that Consumer Reports does on behalf of consumers is really critical. We cover a lot of consumer issues here. We've expressed similar frustrations with Washington not moving quick enough for consumers. So it's great to see that there's an organization that's still thriving in this space, and people still find value in the membership. And I think I've had a membership since I was like 3 years old. I'm a consumer nerd here. So, well, Jim, thank you very much for joining us. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I want to thank Jim for coming on the show and telling us a little bit more about the survey and some of the work that Consumer Reports does. As I mentioned, I am a member of Consumer Reports and have been for a very long time. And if you're not a member, you should maybe consider becoming one, because they really do a lot of work behind the scenes to try to make things better for consumers. That'll do it for this one. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.